Hello and welcome to the Kevin Mannix Report. I'm Kevin Mannix, your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more information and insight about what goes on in and around government, and especially some insight about people who are involved in government, both in political office and in various organizations that get involved with government. Our guest today is a highfalutin politician, somebody in high political office, the Democratic leader of the Oregon Senate, Kate Brown. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I sort of kid a little bit. I shouldn't say highfalutin. We're all highfalutin politicians. One of the things we try to do on the show, though, is give folks a little more insight about the background of folks who are involved in office. We see sound bites and all of that, but we don't always learn enough about people. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm from Portland. I live on the east side of Portland. That's my Senate district. And I went to law school at Lewis & Clark, Northwestern School of the Law, and graduated in 1985. That will date me. And practiced family law in Portland area for about 5 years. And then I made a change and had my first session in 1991 at the Oregon Legislature.
Now, what impelled you or compelled you to go to law school in the first place?
I think the biggest reason for me was to really make a difference in people's lives and to use the tools that law school would give me to make the world a better place to live.
So as you're going through law school, did you focus on any particular course content besides the regular stuff?
I did. I got a certificate in environmental conservation, and that was a follow-up on my bachelor's degree in environmental conservation, and had really planned to practice environmental law. Never got there, of course, but had those plans. I also studied human rights issues, civil rights, women in the law, those kinds of issues.
Now, you mentioned you practiced and you did family law. I noticed as you got involved in politics, domestic violence was one of many issues that you've been concerned with. But was there something that drew you into family law right after law school, after you'd studied these other topics?
Actually, it seems like such a long time ago now. I came out of law school not really intending to practice, and other job scenarios fell through. I had applied for the Peace Corps, did some other things, and then those just didn't feel right. The one class in law school that I really, really enjoyed was the family law class. In addition to that, unfortunately, during law school, I also went through a divorce, so I had the personal circumstances and the sort of the empathy for other clients going through the process that I think are somewhat helpful in doing family law cases. So between my personal circumstances and my lack of other alternatives in terms of a legal practice, I ended up going straight to practice for a family law firm.
Now, at some point, you had to become involved in the legislative process, because I remember meeting you in the 1989 session when I was a freshman in the House of Representatives, and you'd come around and you were lobbying with the Judiciary Committee. What were you doing during that session? How'd you get into that?
It was actually through the trial lawyers. They at that point had a family law section, and they had some family law bills that I had an opportunity to work on, and it was a really incredible experience. I think my recollection is that our favorite Representative Peter Courtney was chairing, I believe, the Family Law Committee at that time. So I had the great opportunity to come down and testify in front of Peter Courtney and all the other folks that were here and work with some legislators in order to get the bill passed. So it was a great experience.
I have to mention, it's interesting how things circled around, because at the time, Peter Courtney, who is now Senator Courtney, was at the time Representative Courtney, and he chaired the Family Law Subcommittee of Judiciary. There was also the Civil Law Subcommittee and the Criminal Law Subcommittee, and I happened to be on the other two subcommittees.
Okay.
But then we sat together, Peter and I, on the full Judiciary Committee, and that Representative Tom Mason was chair of that year.
Okay.
It's funny, it's sort of like looking back at high school or something, you remember who was doing what.
What?
But there you are, you're in the Senate now as a Democrat from the Portland area, and Peter Courtney is now Senator Courtney, having been just elected from the Salem area. And
You
things
joined
change.
us for a few months in the Senate, and now you're back in the House, so.
We just kind of bounce around in the political circles. Well, all right, so in '89, there you were bringing up some issues to the legislature, but then in '91, you came back as a member. Can you tell us about that transition?
Actually, it was '91, I lobbied for a Women's Rights Coalition for this session.
Oh.
And the Women's Rights Coalition is a coalition of women's organizations, folks like AUW, Planned Parenthood, Oregon NARAL, YWCA, those kinds of organizations. What they do is pool their resources and hire an individual to work during the session. And because of my involvement in the '89 session, I had the interest, I had the legal background, and I was hired to be their lobbyist during the '91 session.
So I've moved up a notch, or in terms of time, it's the '93 session we'll talk about.
Yep.
The transitions.
Yep.
Well, how did you find that shift then between '89 and '91? Because in 1989, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. Now in '91, the Republicans took a majority in the House, but the Democrats still had a majority in the Senate. Was it interesting to bridge that gap in trying to get things done?
Sure, but the issues I was working on at the time were issues that both the Democrats and the Republicans responded very well to. I used my family law background to work on some child support enforcement issues. We worked on improving the domestic violence laws, which both parties support. And we also passed, you may recall, in 1991, family medical leave, which allows parents to stay home and care for their very sick children or their very sick parents without fear of losing their jobs. So in terms of that session, I think I was fortunate enough to be working on issues that both sides were responsive to. So I didn't really notice a huge difference at that time.
All right, so now we have Kate Brown, the part-time lobbyist, doing some things for the trial lawyers in '89 and '91, basically full-time, working on with the Women's Rights Coalition. Now, this sounds like a moth to a flame. You're being drawn in here. Then you ran for office. Can you tell me about that transition?
Sure. It was actually pretty unusual at the time. You may recall my legislator, Judy Bauman, resigned following the '91 session. I got a phone call from then Senator Shirley Gold, and she said to me, "Are you interested in seeking the appointment?" Well, I'd had a wonderful experience working with the legislature. I realized that each one of us can have an impact at the Oregon legislature, and I thought, I was single, didn't have any specific career plans. It just seemed like a wonderful opportunity. So I easily got the appointment. The appointment process is done through the local county commission. Got the appointment and turned around and filed to run for the House seat for the '92 election cycle. Unfortunately, Judy ended up not getting the job that she had left her legislative seat.
She'd
for.
had to resign to be appointed to the executive branch, but then
Yep.
that had fallen through. Okay.
Yep. So she called me then, and I think it was January, and said, "Oh, by the way, I've decided I'm going to go ahead and run for my seat." Well, at that point, I'd been in the legislature for probably 2 months. I really enjoyed it. It was interesting. The transition you talk about is very interesting. As the lobbyist for Women's Rights Coalition, I was young. It was considered public interest lobbying, so you don't have a ton of influence in the building. You certainly don't have the resources to take legislators out for dinner or lunch that other sort of business lobby are able to do. So I know that lots of people didn't know who I was, and then you turn around, it was less than 6 months after the session, and you're actually a legislator. I mean, the lobbyists treat you nicely. I mean, it's just a whole different ball game. So that transition was very interesting for me, and I will never forget it.
And then you decided then you wanted to hang on to that.
I wanted that seat. It was great fun. Judy and I both ran very hard. It was a May primary. In that seat, it was then House District 13. The race is basically decided in the primary. And she and I were, I would say, very philosophically similar. She had a lot of legislative experience. She'd been there for 3 terms, and her former husband had represented the area prior to that. The lobby considered her the incumbent, so for the most part, I can name a few exceptions, but for the most part, they supported her campaign. And I had no name familiarity and about half the money she did. But we walked and talked, and I beat her. So it was really exciting.
That's an empowerment situation.
Oh, it was a great feeling. I beat her by 7 votes out of 7,000 that were cast. So it was, not only was it empowering, it was sort of breathtaking to actually do it.
Then, of course, in the November election, since that district was largely Democratic, the primary was the real battle.
Exactly right. And I had an easy battle in the general, and I basically have had fairly easy battles since then. Unfortunately, in 1996, Shirley Gold, my senator, chose to run for Congress, and I say unfortunately because she didn't win. I guess fortunately for her, it was sort of a life dream, and great that she had the opportunity to do that. But so I ran for the Senate seat. I took both the Republican and Democratic nominations, so at least getting to the Senate was a lot easier than my first House race.
And you'll be in for the rest of, you got 2 years to go basically in this term.
I have 2 years in this term, and then I will be up again in the year 2000.
And you're allowed that additional term under term limits.
I was fortunate under the term limits. I moved over to the Senate with only 4 years in the House, so I can serve a full 8 years in the Senate if I choose to do that. But unfortunately, I'll be termed out at the ripe old age of 44.
Well, we were going to talk in a few minutes about term limits, but I'd like to pick up on a little more background here. So here you are transitioning first into the House. So you had the 93 session as a member of the House, and then you shift over to the Senate. What was it like moving from the House to the Senate?
Oh, it's two different ball games. I remember my first few weeks in the Senate. It's the body's smaller, it's half the size. The members tend to be older and more experienced, quieter, more reserved. I mean, I used to tell people it was like going from kindergarten to a doctorate program in terms of shocking differences. I remember going last session and watching some of the floor debates. There's a lot of folks on the floor, a lot of people talking, a lot going on. The Senate, usually, it's pretty quiet and much calmer place to be. So it was quite a change. Plus, your responsibilities double. Your districts are twice as big, and your committee assignments double. So going from having 1 or 2 committee assignments in the House to the Senate, being in committees all the time, it was quite a shock.
If I go back to the 93 session, which was your first full session in the House, that was also, for better or for worse, the long session that ran into August. And it seemed to me that the House and the Senate really diverged about how they were going to accommodate a large number of issues. There seems to have been less of that divergence since then. Did you find that riotous atmosphere a little difficult at first, or was that something because you'd been lobbying and been around before that you could deal with it?
I think I was pretty used to it. I was really fortunate my first session in the legislature. I had worked with Del Parks in the 91 session on some legislation, and when it came time for committee assignments, I asked to be on Judiciary, and that was the only committee I asked to be on. I think I relieved the then Speaker Larry Campbell's problems about people wanting to be on specific committees. I only wanted one. I was easy, and Del was willing to have me on the committee. So I got to serve in Judiciary, and I got to focus in the family law area on the issues that I really cared about. I also worked in criminal law, and I'd had a little bit of background in criminal law, so that was good too. So I was able to really focus on the issues I cared about, women's health, domestic violence, family law, and kind of let the buzz go on alongside of me and get done what I wanted to get done.
We're going to pause for a moment, and I'll mention to the audience that you're with us on the Kevin Mannix Report. It's called that because it's a handy way to get my name in the listings in the newspaper. We used to call the show Capital Insight. In any event, if you ever have any questions or comments, feel free to contact us at the Kevin Mannix Report, and you can write to 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301, or you can call at 503-364-1913. That's 503-364-1913, and we're always happy to hear from you. And the person we're hearing from now is Kate Brown, our Democratic leader in the Senate. We were just talking about this, the transitions and what it was like in the '93 session. I want to get back to something you mentioned as what it was like, being a lobbyist for a public interest type group, and then coming in and being an incumbent, this transition. Well, what was it like finally to be a fully elected incumbent in terms of dealing with the lobby as opposed to how it was before?
Well, I would say that once you become a member of the legislature, the lobby treats you with respect. Whether they agree with what you say or what you do, they at least treat you with respect. So that was a big change. It was great fun.
There was a transition that I went through, and I was not in the '97 session, and I wasn't in the House. I did come in on behalf of 3 clients on 3 individual items. So I was practicing my regular law, but I came over to the Capitol a lot and registered as a lobbyist and took care of some things. And I noticed the distinct difference, what it was like to be there as a former Representative Mannix as opposed to Representative Mannix. People were nice, but they were busy, and unless they really needed to talk to you, it was, time to move on. And I also had a little sensitivity training, which you had gone through before, as to what it's like trying to reach a legislator who's on the floor. You're sending notes, because lobbyists aren't allowed to go on the floor area. They have to stay outside in the lobby. And it was a little bit of an eye-opener about how patient you have to be and how tough it is. And I will say on the side how snooty some legislators can be. Most were pretty kind, especially to a former representative. But you also learn that there's gradations of niceness among politicians.
I think that was the hardest thing for me in being a lobbyist was I grew up in the Midwest and was either raised by a family that believed very strongly in politeness, so I had a hard time interrupting people and being aggressive in terms of following legislators to areas where I wouldn't think you would normally follow legislators to, like restrooms. So that took a while for me to get over that sort of Minnesota niceness. But I think it was very helpful as a background training for lobbying as well, because there's certain rules you need to follow, like don't interrupt a legislator who's talking with another lobbyist. So, but there are certainly rules that lobbyists have to follow, and most of them do.
Well, now, moving from the process to, I'll start moving towards more substance. This session, you are now the Democratic leader, and that means the Democrats in the Senate got together and selected you in their caucus to be the spokesperson for the Democratic caucus. How has that transition been?
It's been very interesting. I certainly have learned a lot. One of the nicest things for us is that last session we only had 10 members versus 20 in the Republican Party, and over the election cycle we picked up 3. So it's even the odds a little bit more, so that's been great fun. I also, sometimes when you're the leader, you need to put aside your personal feelings and speak for the group. So it's learning to listen to what others have to say, and it's learning to respect others' needs and helping them get their needs met. So it's been an interesting transition for me.
I've got to ask you, what it's like being Peter Courtney's boss?
It was very hard at first. My first 2 sessions, Peter was the leader, so it was pretty hard for me to develop some kind of relationship working with him. And believe me, I'm not Peter Courtney's boss. I'm not sure anyone is Peter Courtney's boss, but I think we've got a great working relationship, and I really appreciate one of the nice things we have in our caucus, about our caucus, is the breadth of experience. We have Senator Cliff Trow from Corvallis, who's been there for almost 20 years. We have Senator Joan Dukes, who's been in the, she's from Svensson. She's been in for about 15 years. Representative now, Senator Peter Courtney's been in for about the same time period, and Senator May Yee from the Albany area. So we have quite a bit of diversity, and we also have one brand new member, Senator Rick Metzger from Welches, Oregon. So we've got a diversity in terms of experience, and what I love is taking those different experience levels and putting everyone's ideas together and coming up with a really wonderful result.
It's interesting to watch some of the dichotomies, because from Welches you have Representative Jim Welch, a conservative Republican who's over on the House side, and then Senator Metzger, who has certainly made a name for himself already, and I don't know how I would label his politics, but he's certainly outspoken and make sure that his voice is heard. And they're both from the same area, but they have different perspectives on a number of issues.
What is really interesting to me, watching folks who have a media background come to the legislature, we actually have three. Senator Ginny Burdick from Portland is a former journalist, and Senator Susan Castillo was a reporter from the Eugene area. Susan was appointed at the beginning of last session. She came in and it was like she owned the place. And for Rick Metzger, it's been the same thing. It's very interesting. He is a former sportscaster, I believe, for KGW. And he is not afraid of talking to the press. He's not afraid of talking. And he's got a lot of unusual ideas. So it's interesting to watch the folks who have a broad background in media come to the legislature and see how comfortable they are in terms of dealing with issues.
I would think, too, that we were talking about Senator Courtney. He was in the House. When I came in, he was returning in 1989, and so he was there for, I guess, well, 5 terms, 10 years. And he'd previously served for 2 terms back in the 80s. And now he's moved from the House to the Senate. Now he was the Democratic leader in the House. You're the Democratic leader in the Senate. So he wasn't competing with you. He's shifted over. But when you look at the Democrats in the caucus in the Senate, you have some pretty lively folks.
Lively is a good way to put it. I told the Senate President today that he's going to regret the day. Some of our members didn't get on a lot of committees or the committees they wanted. So when committees start closing down in the next couple of months, hopefully, they're going to be out there causing trouble. And I think the Senate President is going to rue the day that he didn't keep some of my members busier.
Ah, yes, idle hands and all of that. Well, now let's talk a little bit about the issues that you see coming up. We're here in April as we speak, and the session has been moving along since January. We've heard a lot about school finance, the K-12 funding issues, and the governor's proposals for adjusting his earlier budget proposals. But from your perspective, what are some of the key issues that you think need to be resolved this session?
Well, I'm certainly concerned about where we are in terms of the overall legislative budget. From my perspective, we've only passed maybe 3 or 4 agency budgets at this point. It's my understanding that Republican leadership is relying on the governor's budget. If that's the case, we're going to be in the red here real soon. Generally speaking, at the outset of a session, we see a budget from the co-chairs, a sort of a legislative plan of how much they want to spend with each agency. We don't have that this session. The Senate President produced a budget, I think it was in November of last year, with still about $200 million in unspecified cuts that we're not sure where they're coming from. So we're not sure what the path is in terms of how we're going to balance the budget and go home. So that's certainly an issue that I believe needs to be resolved, and in fact we're constitutionally required to do so before we go home.
Let me ask you about that. It's almost like a little bit of shadow dancing here. The governor came in with a budget proposal which, if you look at the bottom line, was about $130 million short of where the funds were. Then the Republican leadership of the Senate came up with a budget proposal with some unspecified cuts, as you've pointed out, and now we're dealing with no co-chair's budget. And of course, that's something that's been traditional, not required necessarily, but it gives some guidance. Do you think that there's going to be a focus then on certain large appropriations measures as defining where the rest of the money is going to go, or do you see some other way of working through this?
That's a good question. I will say the governor presented this morning his rebalance on his budget, so that should be available to you soon. So we feel that the governor's at least balanced his budget. In terms of the other agency budgets, I think the issue is going to come down to, are we willing to adequately fund our K-12 schools? I think that's what's driving the entire process. And to the extent that we decide to do that first, that's fine. We also might need to leave it for last. I think somebody just needs to make a decision, i.e. leadership, about which way we're going to go and how we're going to get there.
Now, I kind of interrupted you as you were getting into some other issues. You might want to pick up on the other
Okay.
issues you were going to focus on.
One of the issues I feel strongly committed to at least addressing before we go home sometime this summer is the transportation package. And the Senate Republicans, Senate leadership, the Republican leadership has put forth a proposal. We've responded, and some of the Senate members are sitting down together and trying to resolve some of those issues. They revolve around the following. How much do we want to increase the gas tax, knowing that no matter how much either side increases it or wants to increase it, that's not going to resolve our funding issues with the Department of Transportation. Whether or not we keep our weight mile in place or move to a diesel, and how we want to ensure that we get accountability from the Department of Transportation. So folks are in the negotiating phase on those issues, and I'm hoping that we can resolve all of them and go home with the transportation package.
Now, how about the Oregon Health Plan and the interaction with the Department of Human Resources and their programs?
I am very supportive of the Oregon Health Plan. It's provided health care to several 100,000 Oregonians that all haven't had access to it. And I think the process we have in place, while not perfect, is better than no process at all in terms of the Health Services Commission determining which services are covered. I'm certainly concerned the governor's budget has asked that we move the list up 10 notches so that 10 fewer services get covered. I'm concerned about that.
You mentioned that's the prioritization list for what services are covered by health care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm also concerned right now if a person who does not have coverage and is low income walks into either a hospital or a drug treatment facility and needs treatment or medical care immediately, we basically allow them to get care, and then we retroactively sign them onto the Oregon Health Plan, so that from the time they walked in for some type of service, they were covered. The governor's budget proposes eliminating that, and I'm concerned that that will be a hardship on low-income folks that don't currently have Oregon Health Plan coverage, but it'll be a hardship for the hospitals and the treatment providers.
Should we consider some sort of a well care plan that helps folks who don't have, say, full access to the Oregon Health Plan, but gets them into the ante-room or some elementary level of preventative care so that we can expand the outreach so that folks, again, who don't qualify or don't quite qualify yet for whatever reasons, can get some service, some access, even if it's just some preventative services?
I think that's a great idea. I think what we have in Oregon is not health care, it's sick care, and that we need to focus on the preventative aspects and keeping people healthy. And any plan, such as you've suggested, that focuses at the prevention end as opposed to the emergency room end, not only keeps folks healthier and happier, but it saves the taxpayers a lot of dollars.
Now, we only have about a minute left, so I'm just wondering, where's Kate Brown going to be in 2 or 4 years?
Oh, I'm hoping I'm still going to be in the Senate crafting legislation and working with my colleagues to make Oregonian a better place to live.
It sounds like being in the Senate is a good thing for you.
Oh, I love it.
And again, you can run for another term, and then after that, who knows?
That's exactly right. I'm committed to staying in the Senate right now, and like you said, I'm not looking out after the year 2000.
Well, thanks very much for joining us on the show. And I'll say to our audience, thank you for joining us on the Kevin Mannix Report. We hope you learned a little bit and enjoyed hearing from Senator Kate Brown, our Democratic leader of the Senate. And we'll see you again next time. So long for now.